And we're live.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good evening, wherever you are. Good afternoon. You start.
Yes, we thought this morning it would be really nice just to do brief introductions to ourselves, because looking around, I know a lot of these faces probably have heard me speak before about kind of why I share what I share, but we will introduce ourselves because I know there are some new people, and every now and then I'll be admitting people on this computer, so that's why I'll be looking this way. The reason we have kind of put these retreats together is because we did one back in April and it was supposed to be in person, but because of everything happening last year, we couldn't go to Sweden and do this retreat and we had to do it online. And I think both of us felt like in some way it was going to be lacking compared to the in-person 3-day. And then at the end of that 3-day and the feedback we had and how well it went, we realized that this message kind of transcends all of that, and it didn't actually matter that we weren't physically together. So then I think this is our 4th one now, and each time we love them. Like at the end of the last one, Dave wanted to add another day on. He didn't want it to finish.
I loved it.
Because it was just so nice being together. So we'd booked this one in for March, and then when we realised we were going into another lockdown, we thought what better time to get people when they can't leave their houses.
Captive audience.
So we brought it forward, and people keep saying to me, how many people are coming to the retreat? And I'm like, I've got no idea. I've put it out there. I've given the link. I've told people to share it. I've probably had maybe 10 emails from people saying that they were coming. And I had no idea then, apart from that, who was going to show up. And I think that's been the other thing that we've loved about these retreats, is that we get to meet new people. We have no idea who's going to be there. And what comes from it is just a feeling of community. And I think that's something I've felt over the last 16 years being around the principles, that when you come together in this conversation, there's this feeling of community and connection, and we've loved it. So for people that don't know me, I'm Jenny. I came across the principles in 2005 when Dr. Roger Mills came over from America, and he was a community psychologist that had been doing incredible work in communities.
Are we recording? We are recording, sorry. Sorry. I just saw the sign.
I've told Dave he's not allowed to heckle me, which he loves to do when I speak. So if anyone notices him heckle me,
I just saw the sign, I'm like, oh God.
And it says it in the top left.
It does, sorry. Yeah, I panicked.
And Dr. Roger Mills really inspired me, because so much of the work he did, he would struggle to get funding for. I know the project he did down in Modelo that's had a book written about it. He worked on like half pay for the first 6 months because he couldn't get the funding. And he believed in what Sydney Banks uncovered so much that he wanted to change psychology and he wanted to help community. And that course that I went on at the time, I was a student and I didn't have any money. And it took me a year to pay back the £250, I think it was, for the weekend. But Roger just wanted people to come. And I feel like him being my first teacher, he's kind of inspired how I wanted to share the principles, because it feels like this should be available to anyone, regardless of their location, financial situation. And I've got no problem with people who do charge. There's all the brackets within this, and we do paid work and all of that, but there's something about Roger that inspired me to be able to make events available. So throughout my time sharing this, I've always had via donation events, and I've loved doing them. And there has often people would say people won't value it if there's not a price on it, and there's been all these beliefs, but there has been people come through all of the via donation events that I've ever put on who have heard something that otherwise wouldn't have been there. And then they're so full of gratitude, and then they share it in some way with someone else, whether it would be their family or friends. And I feel like that's what this is all about. And I know there's many people on here who are doing great work with the principles, loads of different facilitators and community group leaders and coaches. There really isn't any kind of judgment from us about how people run, because we charge money for all of our other services, but this is something that we've just absolutely loved putting on.
Yeah.
And the fact that we do then get so many people from all over the world is fantastic. And the reason we're both inspired to share is because of the impact it had on us. And I think I'd come from a background with my mum and dad who were into self-development and bettering yourself, and kind of a lot of work and effort. And when I started struggling around 13 with eating disorders, and my kind of shyness had got to the point in a secondary school that it was unbearable, and it was very difficult for me to attend school. It was difficult for me to be around people. So suddenly this kind of kid who was a bit shy, that went from a primary school with 50 kids thrown into a 800 pupil secondary school, became very, very dark in my mind, and found it incredibly hard to be around people. And I think at that point my mum and dad were worried, so they started throwing all kinds of courses at me, and I got to see some different therapists, like kinesiology, homeopathy, all these beautiful things to try and help me not feel so broken, not feel so bad. And at the age of 23, going to a course with my sister in London to learn about the 3 principles. Like, a few people had tried to explain to me what they were before I went. I'd had a couple of meals with people, and I had no idea what I was going to. I really, really had no idea. And I often say this, like, the first half of the day I completely missed, because at the beginning there was about 30 or 40 people and we had to introduce ourselves. And it crippled me. Like, I was one of the last people that had to introduce themselves. And by the time it got to me, my heart was pounding. I was bright red. I was shaking. I managed to spit my name out and kind of say I was there because of my sister. And then it took me the half the day to calm down from that experience. And then at the end of that first day, I remember Roger Mills just said, "Go away and have a nice evening. You don't have to think about this." And it was a group of us. We went away and we had dinner together and had a nice evening. And then when we went back the next day, my cousin had promised me that she'd speak for me. So she did the introduction, that we did what you said, we haven't spoken about it, and we had a nice night. And then over the next 2 days, it was like this peace within me that I hadn't experienced for a long time. Like, moments of it, but not to this depth, and not since I was a child. I don't think that experience of deep peace, and I couldn't put it into words. And then I remember the drive home from London, we were all together, and then I drove myself back to my mum and dad's at the time, where I was living. And I describe it as like, I got to drive into the village I grew up in and actually see it. Like, I'd not seen it before. I don't know where I'd been, but I hadn't been present. And I saw thatched roofs, and after that, I didn't know they were called sundogs then, but there was all the rainbows in the clouds. And it was just one of the most stunning drives that I've ever done. And over the next couple of days, like, my mum and dad felt like this new person was there, a different person, and it was quite scary for them. And they thought maybe this was some kind of cult or brainwashing thing, or I was taking drugs, because in their mind, change takes a long time. You know, they'd been around self-development fully, like, since the 70s, both of them, loads of different types of programs, and they goes to this event with these people that they don't know, and then they come back completely different, and it was really scary for them. But I think my dad always says the thing that got him interested is this sustained change, that then over the next coming months they could see that something had shifted within me that allowed me to be comfortable as me, in myself. And it wasn't that I was the loudest extrovert, and I no way would have been doing these kind of things back then, but like that glimpse, a moment of peace and the experience of being comfortable, was something that then just opened my mind to a completely different world. And looking back, I can kind of put words to it, but at the time there really weren't any words. So please don't try and figure this out. And I think what I have grown in appreciation for is that initial experience and uncovering introduced me to something that's continued to teach me. And like wherever I go, this understanding is with me, and I continue to learn. And I know there's been times I've been at a conference thinking, oh, what else is there I'm going to be able to hear or see? Like I'd almost feel full, or like I'd got to the end of something, and then you sort of sit there and you're blown away because you'll hear again the simplicity of this. And I feel like at this, over the last couple, like since the beginning of 2020 and everything that's unfolded, and I've been so grateful for this understanding, because I haven't kind of thinking about how I used to be and how scared I used to be before this. I haven't really experienced loads of panic and fear, and I used to run off into the future continually. And this is something that seems to have held me present a lot more over this time. And I think the deepest thing that I know is that every single being is okay. Like, regardless of how they show up, regardless of what they present, there's absolute okayness at their heart. And I feel that's what Roger knew when he was teaching us. He knew like he knew like he knew. And he spoke to wholeness, and he spoke to health. And it was so fascinating because it felt like he was talking directly to me, but there was 30 people in the room. He never addressed any of what I thought my issues were, but he spoke directly to me. And I think over the years, the more I've been around this, often people say that they get that sense. It's like you're speaking directly to me. And it's because this message is speaking directly to you. It's not speaking to who you think you are or your character, but it's speaking directly to you. And I think that's why when we hear this, there's something within us that knows it already. It's that absolute knowing already. I knew this. How could I have forgotten? And that's what I feel the most grateful for with Roger, because that's what he brought to the conversation, was just this. He just knew that people were okay. He called it innate health. He saw innate health and he spoke to innate health. And I think his work across America, I think he got the President's Handshake, he won the, and then a policeman that he worked with won the Californian Peace Prize for one of the projects that he did. And because of what I understood when I came across this with Rogers, like it's then led me to do this work. And then I know the people I've worked with have then gone on to do more. And then my family's kind of been involved. And then my sister has, she teaches, she has children. It's like I can see how that ripple effect that Roger spoke about has happened. He just said you can sometimes feel like, how on earth will I change this community? Or how on earth could I help this family? But it's like you don't take into consideration the ripple effect of like that one person changing like ripples out. And it's so much greater than we could imagine. And like I've loved when we had a friend who was like, if this is so good, why does no one know about it? This was in about 2008. If this is so good, why does no one know about it? And it actually inspired the idea for the Three Principles movies. So it was one of Rudy's best friends. He was just like poking him, like, well, if it's good, why is there nothing online? Why can't I get books? So then over the course of a few years, Rudy and I filmed people all over the world sharing their stories about how the principles had impacted them. We got to go into the prison systems, business, homeless shelters. And I think that again was one of those leaps for me of like, wow, this is true for everyone. Like I'd seen it was true for me, and I kind of thought I knew it was possible for anyone. But then when I got to see people in all different circumstances, people that have been written off by society, or people have been written off by the medical industry, like wake up to this and then share in such incredible ways. It was like, this really is true. This really is true for everyone. And so I feel like the message is one that, again, transcends past, transcends circumstance. It transcends. And I think that's something that still blows my mind. Like, and I always make sure I tell people, I get totally lost in my own mind and lost in my own story sometimes. I can still feel really shy. I can get embarrassed, like you try and embarrass me as a hobby or a sport. But it's like, whatever I learn in within this has allowed me to realise I can handle any feeling. I don't need to look at the feelings and get so mesmerised by them. And we often say this at the beginning, you know, what we're sharing isn't in any way an anaesthetic to life. You're not going to learn this and then not feel the feelings you don't like. But with understanding, life starts to look very, very different. So, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So, thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. It really means a lot to Jenny and I. It means a lot that we get to do this work. I just want to. I'm Dave Elleray. I just want to read our Freedom Thinking mission statement to begin with. Bear with. So, our vision. We see a world united in understanding and common humanity, where every individual realizes their own connection, innate resilience, creativity, and potential to create a life in which they thrive and flourish. We see a world where all people are understood, appreciated, valued, and included in the creation of a viable existence for every living being, and for the well-being of the whole takes a sustainable precedence. That's the Freedom Thinking mission statement. That's kind of what we're about. We genuinely believe in this. We genuinely believe that between us all, we can create a world that doesn't see separation between people, cultures, colours, religions, creeds, sexuality, gender, species, where humanity can realign itself back into a space of truth. I believe this is happening. I believe this is happening in a monumental way. It's not something that heard it described earlier on this week. It's not something that will take time. It's something that will take alignment. And once alignment takes place, instantaneously change takes place. That's free. I just want to say we do this over 3 days. And this is for a really specific reason. And that is for newer people, day one can often be quite heady. You know, you sit there and you're like, all these questions are coming up, and yeah, but you're filtering it through the ego. We're filtering it through what we've already learned. Oh, this is just Buddhism. Oh, this is CBT. This is NLP. I've heard all this before. This is religion. Oh, this is fucking cool. It's like we filter it through what we kind of already know, and we're trying to make sense of it. And that's what the intellect wants to do. It wants to make sense. This isn't an intellectual process. The intellect, when we're putting gear and we're driving forward, pushing forward with the intellect, trying to figure all this out, I can only promise you won't find it. This is found through stillness and quiet. Stillness and quiet doesn't mean you have to be quiet for an hour. A moment of stillness and quiet, a moment, a glimpse of it, a fraction of a second, just a fraction of a second, can allow something new into our being that was previously unseen. So we do it over 3 days for a very specific reason. It's day one, we generally find like it's quite busy. Perhaps we've got something on our mind. There's this fucking thing. There's this thing that's kind of got hold of me right now, and I'm listening through this problem. I want them to address this problem. We start listening in that way. Oh, when are they gonna mention my problem? Whether that be a future-based thing or a past-based thing or whatever it be. My fear, my worry, my anxiety, my depression. When are they going to get to the subject of my depression? We listen quite often through that. I just ask, please don't. Please just listen. That worry, that anxiety, that depression, that sadness is a secondary thing. It's a secondary thing. It's not a cause. It's not the source. It's a consequence. And what we want to go to over this next 3 days is we want to try and invite people to realize source. You find the source, you find the answer to the secondary. The secondary is always created from the source. The source exists. It's nothing you can add to yourself. We can't add this to ourselves. The principles can't give you anything. To those people who maybe haven't come across the 3 principles as such, I'm guessing most people will have, but we'll talk a little bit about the 3 principles, but then we probably won't talk anymore about the 3 principles in particular. We'll just get it out of the way. It sounds terrible.
You mean the definition?
Yeah, the definition. But please understand, it's just a metaphor. The principles are just a metaphor. And I personally believe they're one of the most beautiful metaphors. On day 2, we generally find, is Phoebe on here by any chance?
No, not yet.
No.
She said she doesn't get up in the mornings.
I wish Phoebe was on here. Young girl we did some work with. She came and did a three-day intensive with us at the time. Day 1, she listened. She was 15. Day 1, she listened. Day 2, she came straight back in and she was like, right, I've got to be honest with you. I don't even know what the hell I'm doing the second day. I'm like, okay. And she said, well, I've thought about it. You're not exactly good role models. What? An ex-anorexic and somebody who's been to prison? You're not exactly good role models. I'm like, all right. Thanks for your honesty. Appreciate that. But if you wouldn't mind, just bearing with us, please. Just seeing this out. It's 3 days. I just ask you, please just sit down. But I don't know what else you can teach me. You've already said everything you need to say. It's not in our words. It's in you. You just haven't realized it yet. Please bear with us. And it got to lunchtime, she sat there, and it got to lunchtime, and all of a sudden, tears started streaming down her face. And we're like, right, lunchtime. Come on, Phoebes. We went for a walk down the garden. Do you mind me asking why you're crying? She said, no. She said, I'm crying for 2 reasons. I said, okay. And what are they? And she said, first reason, I'm so pissed off that I've spent since the age of 7 in therapy. I've spent so much time talking about my problems. And she said, but I'm also crying because I've just realized I am fine and I'm well. It's day 2. Now she can start to listen. Now she can really start to listen. Now her mind's open. She's not filtering it through, oh, this boy's been to prison, she's an ex-anorexic, look at the state of these two. She's just open and listening now. Her consciousness has opened, her mind has opened. An open consciousness creates a whole new world of possibility and potential. And then day 3, we generally find, like, people, that's where people really start to hear. Not just listen, but hear. And what an individual hears will be perfect for them. So yeah, that's why we do this over 3 days. So I encourage anybody, if you can, appreciate people are busy, but if you can, for 3 days, just set aside this time and see what emerges. So yeah, my name's Dave, as I've just mentioned before, but yeah, I came across this in 2013. And it took me a few weeks from being introduced by a lady called Sue. Is Sue on? Being introduced by a lady called Sue Hugenson, who's one of my best mates. I had a big breakdown in 2012. I was suicidal. I've seen a lot of therapists and psychologists. I'd been for quite a while. I'd been medicated. I was drinking a lot. I was running around like an absolute bloody idiot. I was a hard man. I was depressed, anxious, worried. And I'm going to keep this really short, but at that time in my life, I was only living for one thing, and that was doing my running, stuff like that. That was the thing that kept me going. And long story short, I fell running up in Scotland. And on this fell run up in Scotland, up in Torridon, or if anybody knows Torridon, it's a long way from the Lake District. I got into a fight after being on a mountain run in a pub. Big fight, shut down the pub. And I decided at that point, in my pissed up state and black eyes and bitten face, that I was going to walk home. I'd had enough. And this was probably one of the lowest points of my life. I'd had an affair. I'd left my wife, and my family had stepped away from me. They were angry, they were upset, they were hurt. I was living with a customer at the time because I didn't have anywhere to live. But at this point, I was up in Scotland, and when I set off walking home, I think I'd walked about 6 miles away from a little place called Shieldaig, which, if anybody knows Shieldaig, it's just the... But I can get into a fight there. There's only about 7 or 8 houses. And it was on this walk home, probably about 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. It's very cold. It was snowing. Pretty much dressed like this. That I had an experience that showed me something about life. I think I was very drunk. I think I fell down a banking whilst going for a wee. And it was in that moment where I experienced something that I have never been able to put into words. But I knew it was more real than anything that I'd ever experienced in my life. To try and describe it is to say things like, there wasn't a world, the world wasn't present. Or I couldn't see a world. I could describe it as I entered it or it entered me. It doesn't matter. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's ultimately the same thing. It was perfect. It was total wholesomeness. The most understanding, love, compassionate. I could only really describe it as being drenched, absolutely saturated in the most pure, unconditional love and light. Total sobriety. No drunkenness. Drunkenness didn't exist in that space. And I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds, I'm guessing. But I became aware of it. And before I knew it, I was back in my physical body again. And my body wasn't down the banking now. It was sat in the middle of the road. And I remember just bursting into tears, and I was screaming at it, please don't leave me, please don't leave me. That didn't change my life in that moment. In fact, I didn't even remember it the next day. We went down to Skye, and long story short, it was only on a walk. I decided I was going to walk back from Skye now. I went back to the van and got in the van with the lads, and we went down to Skye. I thought I'm going to walk back from Skye, and it was in this moment where I phoned up my dad. I said, look, Dad, I need your help. I hadn't spoken to Dad for a long time. He said, where are you? I said, I'm on the Isle of Skye. He's like, what the hell are you doing on the Isle of Skye? Well, I'm just I've been for a run, Dad. Been for a run on the Isle of Skye? Yes. Been for a run on the Isle of Skye. I need your help. He said, I'm coming. And it was on this walk home, actually. I said, well, I'm setting off walking from Skye, Dad. I'll meet you somewhere. And it was on this walk where I remembered this experience. And it just stopped me dead. What the hell was that? And I just completely relived it in my mind. And I asked it for help. I asked it to get me home quickly and safely. And it got me home quickly and safely. That happened, that took place. Cars, I was hitching, cars instantly stopped. First time. One of them was my sister, who'd come looking for me. And I just got out of a car, crossed a road junction before her and Ewan, my brother-in-law, pulled up. They were on the honeymoon up in Torridon. That's how much we didn't communicate at that time. I didn't know. I got home. And since that time, what that showed me initially was that there is a force behind all things. I knew that space was all things. And it was all people. And we don't get to see it on the everyday level. But it's from that all things come into being, all experience, all matter, the world, the universe. And it was just all encompassing love and perfection. And familiarity, funnily enough. But it was after that I could only really describe them as miracles took place. Very quickly, things started coming into my life that kind of helped me. And one of them was meeting Sue, and Sue got in touch with me and said, look, I've got something to tell you. I was a bit upset at the time. I was a tree surgeon. She called me around to look at a tree. There wasn't a tree in a garden. So I was a bit upset about that. And she said she had something to teach me. And I listened. I'm thankful I listened. Took me 9 weeks. Took me 9 weeks. Slow learner here. Took me 9 weeks. But after that 9 weeks, I put something of Sydney Banks on and I went for a walk, and I could only really describe it as I woke up. I woke up in that moment. It was a time I was still planning on committing suicide. The experience in Scotland didn't make me happy. It made me realize I can bring things into the world if I ask for it. I can bring things into stuff, situations into the world if I ask for it. It didn't set me free in terms of happiness. That came later on after listening to Sydney Banks. And in that moment, it was an experience that I can't put into words, but it was very much more earth-based. I would describe it as being more grounded on earth. The first one wasn't. The first one wasn't earth-based. It was. I can't tell you what the hell it is. But it's everybody. The second one was very much earth-based. It was the nature of reality. It was waking up to the nature of reality. The everyday experience of all life. And in that I knew that all beings were it. I saw a jackdaw, a crow, and I knew that that was it too. The jackdaw is just like the crow was me. We're all animated by the same force. We all have the same creative force of creation. And we all use it in different ways. This is our gift. Now, for people who, like myself, who were not aware of this, the creation, I could almost describe it as like the creation took me for a ride. It was like being set on a roller coaster and you're just going for a ride. But once I became aware, I became more discerning with creation. I realized I was the power that ultimately did the creating. And that's where I found freedom. And I want to put a disclaimer in here about freedom. The freedom, we call this the Logic of Freedom retreat. We want to talk about freedom in a time when many people feel like freedom is being taken away from us. Or perhaps we are living in a time when freedom just isn't an option right now. Or perhaps it never has been. Perhaps people are in prison. Been to prison. I've had that freedom taken away, the freedom of movement taken away. But we want to talk about the logic of freedom, true freedom. A freedom which cannot be touched by any person, by any circumstance. The freedom that we're talking about isn't a feeling state. It's not I had a client once say, I want the freedom you have, Dave. And I said, okay, what does that look like to you? And he said, you're always happy and you love everyone. I said, that's interesting. Because that's not true. That's interesting, that's what you see in me. I always love everyone. Sometimes I'm a right miserable bastard. I can be a right grumpy bastard. I said, but I do think I am free. Because I'm free to be that too. I said, what you've described is a prison. Where you are only allowing yourself to experience a certain spectrum of experience. That's a prison. If you believe you should only ever experience certain feeling states and certain thoughts, you've created a limitation upon ultimate freedom. You've created a prison. The freedom we're talking about is to be free to live, to be free to grow. Sometimes our deepest growths come from our deepest depressions. We become so afraid of our experiences because we misunderstand the nature of it. I did. That's why I took medicine, to stop me from feeling a certain way. That's why I went and saw psychologists, because I was afraid of my life. I was afraid of myself. I was the scariest man I'd ever met, I used to say. And I cannot leave me alone. And I will not leave me alone. But to wake up, to realize the nature of reality, the total nature of reality, not 99% of the total, no, to wake up and realize how reality works. It's not so then you can spend your life controlling it. It's so that then you can wake up, realize you are alive and live. I described it as my birthday, the day I woke up. It was like the first day I ever stood on planet Earth. It genuinely was. It was like the first day I stood on planet Earth. And I was like, I hated humanity because I felt like we were cancer, destroying the planet, destroying one another. I was racist. I was just a dickhead, really. But then to wake up and see the perfection of life, no matter how it was showing up, it was perfect, was to find the freedom from the fear that created my racism, my dickheadness, my anxiety, my worries. And the freedom just to stand there and live, to find life. I think I'm not religious. Please, I love quoting bits of Bible and bits of religious text that I've since come across that I personally find really kind of point to it. But as Jesus Christ described the virgin birth, I understood it. I understood the virgin birth, the rebirth that takes place within the consciousness of a human being. The rebirth, the birth, as it was described, the birth from mother wisdom. Made total sense. And all of a sudden, religion, or I should say religious text, started to make sense. So yeah, 3 days. We've got some amazing guest speakers. We've got my sister who came across this the year after I did, and there she is waving. She's beautiful. She's just one of my best mates. I'm so fortunate to have her in my life, and we have each other to bounce this off. And so we've got my sister speaking, and we've also got a man called Dr. Dickon Bettinger, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with.
He's today at 3:30.
He's today at 3:30. And then on Monday, we've got Elsie Spittle, which again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Those who aren't, Elsie is a beautiful lady. She was around Sydney Banks before he had his enlightenment experience. And also subsequently, she'll describe it, I'm sure, but she has gone on to share his message, and we love the way that Elsie shares. So we've asked for Elsie Spittle to come and join us as well. So she's coming on Monday. Share a bit about Principle.
Yeah, I was just going to say also that Elsie worked closely with Roger Mills, and her stories of working on Skid Row down in LA and different, she went into the prison systems. She has travelled around America sharing this in all different places. Then she's gone into business and work with business people. And she just said, I was a housewife. I think the only job she'd had before was being a secretary, and for a while she was insecure about that. And she'll probably mention it, but it took her about a year of being around Sid after his experience before she could hear him, before she'd listen. She just thought he was living kind of in la la land, and she was really resistant. But when she heard so deeply that she became a student of life. She became a student of Sid's. And she said, after I'm not sure how many years of sort of being around Sid, is like, you need to now go off into the world and share this. Like, stop being around me, go off and share. And she really has shared this in so many different places. So I think your mum had said, oh, I'd love to get Elsie Spittle to come to the Lake District. So we haven't managed that in person, but we've got her to come and be part of this retreat. And I think we messaged her, and within 24 hours she got back and said, I'd love to be part of it. And I think that's just so Elsie. She's a very giving, loving lady. And she's someone who I heard speak at a conference in probably 2011. And I had the same insecurity. Like, I'm not a psychologist. I haven't trained in this. I haven't got a degree. And she just said to me, that's the good news, dearie, or something like that, and just chuckled. And then she came up to me after I'd given my talk at the conference, and it was just, oh, that's beautiful, beautiful. And she held my hand. And so she is someone who I think probably believed in me as a teacher before I did. So I'm so glad to have her. And like Dave was saying, Lisa, I've been around Lisa for the last 5 years, and I love how she shares and the energy she brings to this. And it's her unique voice. You won't hear her sharing really that sounds like someone else. She's just completely shares from her. And I've loved being around that. And Dickon, as again, one of the most dear people to me, he supported me through all kinds of life changes, and was another person that believed in me as a teacher before I did. I met him in end of 2008, and then for many years he's been doing trainings over in the UK with us. We said last year was the first year that I hadn't seen him since 2008. So I'm so grateful to have everyone sort of be part of this and get to hear them speak. And also we've got opportunities throughout each of the days where we have time for reflections and observations, and that's where we want to hear from everybody else.
Questions. And
see if people have questions or if they've seen things. I've put that in the afternoon, I think, on all 3 days, because you'll answer your own questions. You'll answer your own questions over the time, so bear with us. Sorry, someone's just coming. It's probably a delivery. So the 3 principles, like Dave was saying, are a metaphor, and it's one of the most beautiful metaphors I think I've come across in pointing and describing the truth, or the before. What comes before? What comes before the human experience? What is that space from which everything emerges? And Sid would often say that he didn't discover, or he didn't create the principles, they were uncovered. He realized them. And he saw that there were all these theories about the mind, and he got so fascinated talking to the psychologists about all these different theories, and it made no sense to him because of what he'd seen. And what he realized is that there's something that's common to all. There's something within us all that's the same. And he seemed to describe it in ways where I could totally get a sense of what he was talking about, and then he'd just go off and I'd have no idea what he was talking about. And I loved that, because it felt like he spoke to the absolute kind of vastness of the energy behind life, like that vastness, that undescribable. And then he fell back down on earth as a human being, and he saw that we were all thinking beings, that we all had this power of thought. He could see that we were all conscious beings, we all had consciousness, and that there was this energy behind that creates, and he called that mind. In his very early recordings, he called it God. because he was brought up as a Christian, and that was his reference to this something bigger. But I think he soon realised that if you use that word, you can really turn a lot of people off, because everyone has their own idea of what that word means. And he used the word mind, which I think is a beautiful word to describe this universal mind, because he saw it as more neutral. You could have conversations with anyone, whether they're religious or not religious, because this wasn't religion, and he knew it wasn't. But he spoke about this universal mind, or this intelligence behind life that we are all part of. He spoke about the fact that we have this consciousness, this awareness. And then we use thought, he says, like the gift that then guides us through life, like a paintbrush that paints reality for us. So he said they're the Trinity. With these three principles, reality is created within each of us. But he knew that what we are is that pure mind, that pure consciousness, that pure thought, with the ability to create. And I think what he realized through being with the psychologists and psychiatrists was that we'd been working in what was created. The anxiety, the depression, the eating disorders. We were always looking at after, always looking at what had been created. And he saw that actually what was going to help people is when they realized that what was created wasn't the truth, was a potential within. And when we start to see that, it does something for us. It allows us to see that, like I often describe, when I came across this, I was shy, anxious, depressed. I was the quiet sister out of the two of us. I was this kind of person. I'd never be good at this. I had all of these ideas of who I was. And on the 3 days, I realized all of that was made up. None of that was who I was. It was what I'd created and bought into. And we've just been reading a lovely book about the early days on Salt Spring by a lady called Linda Quiring. And she has a story in there when a man named Robert had heard about Sydney Banks, and he came over to meet him. He was a searcher. And she said she picked him up and took him to see Sid, and he put down on the table all of his qualifications. He had this like folder full of things that he'd learned and he knew. And Sid apparently had this amused look on his face. And the guy was it sounded like he got quite offended. He was like, aren't you going to even look at this? How are you going to help me if you don't even know who I am? And apparently Sydney Banks just looked at him and said, I know who you are. And this guy's kind of like, well, that's preposterous. How could you possibly know who I am? And Sid said, I know who you are. And I think that's the point. Who we think we are is not who we are. We are the awareness that thinks into life a character, a persona. And if we don't know that, we can feel totally at sea, totally at the mercy of what we think. When we start to recognize that the awareness in which we were born with, that thought has passed through, is the constant, is the thing that hasn't left us. That pure awareness that witnessed 3-year-old thoughts, 5-year-old thoughts, 10-year-old thoughts. Each of them, each of the realities created at those different ages, we bought into, and we thought that was true. That was reality. But how dramatically it changes over our life in so many ways. And I think we have a whole system at the moment that looks at what we've created, those personalities. And then we even go back to old personalities to try and find out why we feel like we feel now. So I'd spent years looking into my childhood, especially my early childhood. But what Sid's message said is, what if we allow people to see who they truly are? What if we bring them back to this moment and they can start to see that what they experience now is coming through thought in the moment? And we do have the gift of memory, so we can bring to life anything. But actually there's no peace to be found by going back through all of the traumatic things that have happened in our lives. And I think when I heard that, that made sense to me. And like you often say, when I used to go to counselling, I used to come out feeling worse after going through all of my things. And I had the same story really, every single time. But the principles are like you often say they're not psychology, but I loved how Sid described it as they're the true psychology. And he said, because the word psychology can be broken down to the logic of the psyche or the logic of the soul. That's really what it's about. And I feel like it's
psychological. Yeah.
He brought together psychology and spirituality in such a beautiful way. Like he brought them back together. It was a false split in the first place. And I feel like the principles unite and brings back together things that have been falsely split. And they are the constants that exist within all life for all people and all things. And I know that a lot of the psychologists who've been around this have God, within science, they get so excited when they find a constant. And this is the constant. This is the constant within life that's reliable, dependable, doesn't leave us. And I'll often say, when I heard this, it was like, this isn't something that was added to me or given to me or that I had to learn. It was something that I already was. And on reflection, I could see how I'd known it at different points in my life. There'd been times where who I thought I was had just slipped away for a moment and I'd found myself present. But I thought that was the fluke. I thought that was that wasn't who I was really. Really, I'm the shy, anxious, one. And I misaligned with the false self. And like you were saying, change doesn't take time, it takes alignment. And through learning the principles, it's like I realigned with who I truly was. And I've seen that again and again and again with people around the world. When they align with who they are, who they're not vanishes. Not through trying, not through effort, but through it cannot be any other way. Because the creation is an after the fact. A creation is not who we are. It's who we think we are. Which is how I can still sometimes have the thought of shyness and feel shy. And like I was saying to you, one of the feelings I really don't like is embarrassment. And I see it so much in my tiny little nephew who's 9. He hates to be embarrassed. Like if he gets told off, he gets so embarrassed. Like he wants to hide his face. And I get it. I'm like, I don't like feeling embarrassed, which is why it's Dave's sport to try and embarrass me publicly in all kinds of ways. But it's like...
That's not true.
You do love to.
I do not.
But it's... What I've loved is like the ability to laugh at myself, not take it all so seriously. We've got a friend at the moment called George. I never know how to pronounce her surname, but she's creating a book and it's asking people to tell stories of what happens when you turn away from seriousness with this understanding. Is there an area in your life where you've seen that you were so serious about, which for me was my eating disorder, my anxiety, my shyness. They were my really 3 things that I was very serious about. So what happened to you when you stopped being so serious about them? And she's writing a whole book with different chapters from different people around that. And I feel that that is, again, something that the principles brings into our life is a lightheartedness. And I hadn't been able to be lighthearted about any of those things before. They were serious problems. They were real things. And the principles, again, I know so many people who share about the principles. I probably refer to them more than you would, but it makes so much sense to me that when you see that thought falls into consciousness and we experience it and it creates reality. But if you then know that there's a deeper intelligence, a deeper mind than what we think, then we can allow things to come and go. And when I put down all those things that I thought were a problem, that space doesn't suddenly become nothing. It's filled. And it's like we get filled with a deeper wisdom, a deeper sense of who we are. And I couldn't have told you what the 3 principles were after my first 3 days. I was like, oh, it's I remembered mind and thought, and I'd forgotten consciousness. And my parents were like, you can't even remember the content of the course. How has this helped you? How can you? And my friend who's a psychology student, she was doing a master's at the time, she's like, you can't even tell me what it is. And I'm like, no. She's like, yeah, but you're different. And it just didn't match up for her. You can't put this into words, but you're completely different. You've changed, but you don't even know what it is. And I was like, yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Because a lift in consciousness, a raise in awareness, doesn't always come, I don't think it does come in words. We can sort of look back and then we try and put words to it. We can try and describe what happened. But it was never those words. It was a shift in consciousness. And Sid always used to just say, so raise your level of conscious state. Raise your level of awareness. Start to have some understanding of what life is. And that's what he spent from 1973 to 2008 when he passed away, sharing with people. And again, a man who didn't have a doctorate or a degree, got to go into the prison systems, he got to go into the military. He went down and visited the homeless shelters, the prisons. He worked closely with prominent psychologists and psychiatrists in America. And I've got so much respect for those psychologists and psychiatrists because they did have doctorates, they did have a whole load of training, but they saw something in Sid and the people around Sid that allowed them to sort of put down what they thought they knew and deeply listen. And they've then gone into the world of psychology and psychiatry and made huge impact and difference. So I've got a great respect for their open-mindedness. And I'm really grateful that I didn't have all of that to see through when I first came across this. Did you say anything else about?
No, I think you've pretty much covered. Yeah, I just want to check. Is our Wi-Fi holding out all right for everybody? I've been texting Mark. Mark, right, cool. You just never know when you get Mark. He asked me if this is. No, forget it.
Is this live?
I'm not even going to entertain him. Yeah.
Mark, thank you.
Yeah.
Dave always heckles me, and you heckle Dave. I can always rely upon you.
But yeah, I think for me it was the simplicity of what Sydney Branks brought. You know, I was a man who had no interest in spirituality or anything like that. That wasn't something that really crossed my radar. I was a dickhead. It's only really words. It's the best word I can use to describe myself in so many respects. I was just a dickhead. I was so busy being bothered about me and what people thought about me and what did people see in me. I was deeply insecure. That's why I was a hard man. That's why I went to the gym and built myself up like a tank, and that's why I intimidated around people. That's why I intimidated my way through life, was because I was deeply insecure, and it felt like if I could make you fear me more than I fear you, I'm safe. It's all born of fear. And like I have to say, one of the first things I did was I went into prisons and started sharing the principles in prisons. And I'd sit with these big fellas, these gang members and all kinds of stuff. And I would tell them that, you know, I was always a hard man, but I was a hard man because I was scared. Not because I was confident, not because I was tough, not because I was strong inside, but because I was scared. And these lads would just burst into tears and go, that's me. You're me. That's why I'm in here. And you realize that this is the universal problem. Well, if we've got a universal problem, we also have a universal solution. All our insecurities create suffering. all our suffering is created from our insecurities. So if we want to start to eliminate our insecurities, we must start to awaken to the nature of them. That's the only way. The only way we can possibly start to overcome insecurities is if we start to become aware as to the nature of them. This is vitally important. This is vitally important. In the grand scheme of things, it's not overly important. It doesn't really matter. But if somebody is looking to have a nicer life, if somebody's looking to have more freedom in life, if somebody's wanting to come out of psychological suffering or mental turmoil, anxieties and worries and fears and depressions and bipolars and all these things, OCDs and schizophrenias, whatever label we put on it, the experience, which is always after the fact, which is always too late. If we want to start to rise out of that, we must start to gain deeper understanding as to the nature of it. You know, you can't fix anything that you don't understand. The beautiful thing about people is they can't be fixed. You can't fix a human being. You can't fix yourself. So that's the first thing we must try. We must realize you cannot fix yourself. The self that is trying to be fixed cannot be fixed. Fundamentally, it's an illusion. And the other point of this is you can't fix what isn't broken. You cannot fix what isn't broken. Anybody, you know, many people come to work with us and we ask them, how long have you been trying to fix yourself for? Years. How's that going? Not very well. Interesting, that. Sit down. Have you ever considered you were never broken in the first place? You've believed you've been broken. Perhaps people have told you that you've trusted. Told you that you were broken, you trusted them and you believed them. But what if those people are as misguided as you are? It's not their fault. It's just the way they see the world in that moment. It's the way they're perceiving you. And in turn, you took on that perception and made it your own and believed it. I spent a lot of time trying to fix myself, only to wake up and realize I wasn't broken. I just lived in complete and utter misunderstanding. I was so bought into my ego. I was so bought into what I thought I was, who I thought I should be in order to operate in this world, and what it is to be a good human being. What's a good human being look like? Well, a good human being looks like this. I look back, I just, I can only laugh. Just to wake up to that wholeness, the divinity, the marvelousness of existence, its inexplicable nature. You know, we can talk about it. These words don't do anything. Words are just words. Words are just noises. I'm just making noises now. That's all language is, just of noises. Can't do anything. They're just noises that most of the time we all agree on their meaning, but many a time I can say one noise. I could say the word God, for example, of 10 people. In fact, I did this in a community group once. I wrote the word God, mark it out of 10, 10 being I love it. Zero being, I absolutely detest that word. I think there were 16 people in the room, and we had every single number between 0 and 10. I think somebody even said 11. And you see that even words that we speak, they mean different things to different people. This is why language is such a clumsy communicatory, such a clumsy communication. Because it's just noises. So it's not found in the noises. The noises, again, are after the fact. Language is something we dreamt up. Language is born of thought. We have to learn it. It's not in these words. You were present before you learnt any words. You were there, living, surviving, thriving, before you learnt any words. It's not in these words. What we're talking about is something that pre-exists words. And like Sydney Banks would say, if you don't like any of the words I'm using, just sack them off. I don't think he actually said that, but paraphrasing. If you don't like that word, use another word. I actually had to use another word just then instead of sack them off, which I thought was very good of me. Yeah, if there's words you don't like, use another word. If there's a word you prefer, use that. Doesn't matter. It's not in words. You can't read your way to it. But everybody is already it. And there is not one single person on the planet who isn't it. There isn't a single being on the planet that isn't it. Whether that's an insect, a fish, a tree, a fungus, your dog, your cat, the plant in your garden, in your front room, or plants in your garden, the birds, all it. Playing the game of separation, playing the game of creation, playing the game of reality. This to me was to wake up and understand the nature of mind, was to wake up and understand the nature of reality. It brings with it as many questions as it brings answers. It will always, always, always remain a mystery. The ultimate creative force will always remain a mystery. You can't know it, but you are it. It's a divine source that creates. And the moment we think we know something, that's creation. Creation cannot see creator. Anything we think it is, it isn't. I remember when I had my realization after listening to Sid, I described thought as being like this. It's the only way I can describe it. It's like this. What does that mean? I don't know. It's too big. Consciousness is too big. It's too abstract. It's nothing we can get our head around. We use the word spiritual. It's just a noise. It means nothing. Spiritual. That you cannot understand. That precedes. That creates. That is unseeable in the everyday experience. But that we can become aware of. And this is the key, is the awareness to it. Suddenly when we become aware of it, and how do we become aware of it? You just know. because you've always known. When you become aware of it, it feels good, feels nice. Niceness for no particular reason. It's just a glow, a warmth, love. Love is its essence. This is why all spiritual teachers who've come into this world have preached love. Not one has preached division and hatred and putting people down and separation, and no wise person's ever done that. Because anybody who wakes up to the nature of life realizes it is a state of something that we call love. Unconditional love. Love without condition. Love without condition, without judgment. Doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what you've done in the past. It does not care. It doesn't judge. That whole thing about God judging us and I'm going to send you to hell now. Depends on your definition of hell. Hell not being a place you go after death, but states of being whilst you're alive. Spent many a time in hell, I have. I often said, though, that to go to hell was to walk through hell's gates was suddenly to find heaven existed behind it for me. I was so afraid of going to hell. I was so afraid of these deep, dark feelings of anger and hatred and fear and worry and anxiety. I was so afraid of those. But one day, for whatever reason, when I got quiet, I realized on the other side of hell is heaven. For many people, they come to the realization of spirit through suffering. I feel what's happening on around the world right now is actually quite a beautiful thing. Many people who go through deep suffering awaken from the other side to realize their wholeness. When this takes place en masse, this world's going to be a different place. This connected consciousness. I don't particularly like the word connected because I often say it's like to say it's connected is to have two things. To connect would take at least two things, something to connect to another thing. No, the things are the illusion. It's not that we're connected, it's that everything is one force playing the game of separation. The separation is a thought, it's an idea, it's a belief, something we ultimately learn. In many cases, it's taught to us. Which is why I love when you describe this as not so much a learning, but an unlearning. The ego is everything we've learned. We hold on tightly to it. We want to hold on to our knowledge because we think it makes us special, makes us interesting, makes us somebody. My knowledge is the most vital thing I own. If somebody can wake up and realize that truly they don't know anything, that's the most powerful place they will ever find themselves. It's in that place where we can truly listen. It's in that place where we can truly we can create afresh. We can realize deeper than the knowledge that we thought we previously held. To realize you know nothing is the most beautiful space because truly we don't know anything. What is life? What is life? We're all alive. Here we are, alive. What is it? What invented it? What dreamt it up? Human beings didn't dream up life. Human beings didn't dream up human beings. Human beings didn't dream up consciousness. Human beings didn't dream up the beautiful capacity of thought. What is life? If you don't know the answer to that question, truly, how can you know anything at all? We just believe. We're taught at school facts. I was taught facts. I was still taught Newtonian science, even though quantum theory had been around for 80 odd, 90 odd years at that point. Still taught Newtonian science. That's fact. Quantum theory has come along to prove that Newtonian science is ultimately misguided in a lot of respects. And quantum theory points to the mystery of all things, which is closer to the truth, but it's still a form. So to start to realize we truly don't know anything is to truly start to let go of the ego. Because the ego is just a ball of knowledge. It's beliefs, it's memories ultimately. That's what the ego is. It's a ball of memories. It's memories we carry around in our rucksack of self-identity that we pull out whenever we need to either defend us ourselves or to try and understand the world. Perhaps to feel superior for some people. We carry this stuff around as though it serves us. And in many cases, it's useful in the everyday life as a human being. I'm not knocking it, But we must start to understand its nature. Yeah. Let's have a break. It's 11 o'clock. Let's have a break. So
15 minutes.
Let's have 15
I'm
minutes.
aware that there's lots of people that are not in the UK, so
yeah,
15 minutes.
15 minutes of them.
It's not 11 o'clock for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, 15 minutes. Just stop recording. You recording on that one?
Yes.
Ah, that's why I was asking, because it couldn't, because that record button